Sam Turner was just an ordinary mailman in a small town, until one fateful evening changed everything. When he found an abandoned baby on a porch, he thought he was doing the right thing by calling for help. But instead of gratitude, he was arrested, accused, and thrown into a storm of lies and prejudice. This is the story of how one act of kindness spiraled into a fight for truth and justice. If you're ready for a powerful journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below and stay tuned for more gripping stories. The sun dipped lazily behind the rows of quiet suburban houses, casting long shadows across Maplewood Lane. Sam Turner, the local mailman, guided his delivery truck down the street, humming a soft tune. It was his favourite part of the day, finishing the last few deliveries and knowing he'd completed his work. Sam was a familiar sight in this neighbourhood, always greeting residents with a smile. Most people knew him by name, and he had come to know them by their mail. The wedding invitations, college acceptance letters, and holiday cards that carried snippets of their lives. As Sam approached the last house on the block, he heard something unusual. It was faint, almost drowned out by the gentle rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze, but it was there, a soft, muffled crying. He stopped, tilting his head to listen more closely. The sound was coming from the porch of the Wilsons' house, where he noticed a small bundle nestled against the front door. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what he was seeing. A baby, wrapped in a thin, faded blanket, lay on the cold wooden steps, trembling. Sam rushed forward, his heart racing, and carefully picked up the tiny, fragile form. The baby's cheeks were red from the chilly air, and its cries grew louder as Sam gently cradled it in his arms. He could feel the shivers running through the small body, and without a second thought, he wrapped his own jacket around the child, trying to provide warmth. "What are you doing out here, little one?" he whispered softly, his mind scrambling to understand the situation. This wasn't something he'd ever expected to see, not here, in this peaceful neighborhood. Sam's hands shook slightly as he fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the confusion brewing inside Sam's head. "There's a baby," he said, his voice shaking. "A baby was left on a porch. It's cold and it's alone. I'm at 235 Maplewood Lane. Please, send someone quickly." The operator assured him that help was on the way. Sam held the baby close, gently rocking it back and forth, murmuring soothing words. He glanced around, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. No hurried footsteps, no concerned voices rushing to claim the child. The whole street felt eerily silent, as if it were holding its breath. Minutes later, flashing lights illuminated the darkening street, and 2 police cars pulled up to the curb. Sam felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone was here to help. He stepped forward, cradling the baby protectively as the officers approached. "Is this the baby you reported?" one of the officers asked, eyeing Sam suspiciously. "Yes," Sam said, nodding. "I found it here on the porch. I called you as soon as I—" "Put the baby down," the officer interrupted, his tone firm. Sam blinked, confused by the sudden shift in demeanor. "I'm just trying to keep it warm." It was shivering. "I said, put the baby down," the officer repeated, stepping closer. "Now!" Reluctantly, Sam complied, carefully setting the baby down on the porch before straightening up, his hands held slightly away from his sides. "I was just trying to help," he said, his voice quieter now, unsure of what was happening. The officers exchanged a look, and within seconds, one of them stepped behind Sam, roughly pulling his hands behind his back. Sam felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around his wrists. "Wait, what are you doing?" Sam protested, panic rising in his chest. "I'm the one who called you. I was just trying to help." "Sir, you're under arrest," the officer said, his tone devoid of sympathy. "You have the right to remain silent." As the officer recited his rights, Sam's mind raced, trying to make sense of this sudden turn of events. The baby's cries grew louder, echoing in the cool evening air, as a few curious neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. One of them, a woman with a phone in hand, began recording the scene, her eyes wide as she watched Sam being led away in handcuffs. "Please, this is a misunderstanding," Sam tried to explain, his voice growing desperate, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officers escorted him to the back of the police car, where he was pushed inside and the door was slammed shut. From the back seat, he could see the porch where he had found the baby, now surrounded by flashing lights and curious onlookers. The baby's cries were still audible, piercing through the thick walls of the car. And Sam felt a surge of helplessness wash over him. As the car started to pull away, he could barely comprehend how his attempt to do the right thing had led to this moment. And he had no idea that it was only the beginning of a much darker journey. The police car screeched to a halt in front of the precinct, and Sam was roughly pulled out, still handcuffed. The officer's grip on his arm was tight, as if Sam might bolt at any moment. As they let him inside, Sam's mind raced, trying to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Only a few hours ago, he had been finishing his mail route, thinking about what to make for dinner, and now he was being treated like a criminal. The fluorescent lights of the station flickered as he was guided down a long, cold hallway, past rows of desks where officers sat, some glancing up with idle curiosity. Sam's mouth was dry, and he tried once more to reason with the officer beside him. "There's been a mistake," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to help." The officer glanced at him, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. "Save it for your lawyer." They led him into a small, windowless interrogation room, and Sam was pushed into a metal chair. The door closed behind him, leaving him alone with nothing but his thoughts and the low hum of a ceiling fan. He stared down at his cuffed hands, his mind replaying the moment he found the baby, trying to find the exact point where everything had gone so terribly wrong. The door creaked open and two officers entered. One of them, a tall, burly man with a stern expression, sat down across from Sam, while the other stood by the door, arms crossed. "Sam Turner, is it?" the officer asked, flipping through a file. "Why don't you tell us what you were doing with that baby?" "I found him," Sam said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He was alone on the porch, and it was cold. I picked him up and called 911. I was just trying to help." The officer nodded slowly, but his eyes were hard. "And what were you doing in that neighborhood? You don't live there, do you?" "I was finishing my mail route," Sam replied. "I deliver to that neighborhood every day." The officer leaned back, his lips curling into a smirk. "Right, so you just happened to find a baby, all alone, and decided to play the hero?" Sam's frustration bubbled over. "I did the right thing. I called you. Why would I do that if I was trying to kidnap the child?" The officer's smirk disappeared. "You'd be surprised how many people make mistakes and try to cover them up. We've had witnesses saying they've seen you around that area before, looking suspicious." Sam's heart pounded in his chest. "I work there. I deliver mail. Of course people see me around." The officer glanced at his partner, who shrugged. "Doesn't look good, Sam. There's a lot of talk going around, and none of it's in your favor." Meanwhile, outside the station. Across town, a video of Sam's arrest was making its rounds on social media. The short, grainy clip showed him being handcuffed with the baby still cradled in his arms, his expression confused and desperate. The caption read, "Man caught trying to kidnap a baby. Beware." It spread like wildfire, shared by thousands who added their own comments, ranging from outrage to disgust. "Why would a grown man be holding someone else's baby like that?" one comment read. "There's no way he was just helping," wrote another. Before long, local news stations picked up the story, and Sam's face appeared on screens all over town. The words, "Attempted kidnapper arrested," splashed across the bottom of the screen. Back at the station, Sam sat in silence, his head bowed, as the officers continued their questioning. He had explained everything, but they were determined not to believe him. Every time he tried to clarify something, they twisted his words, making him sound guilty. "You have to believe me," Sam said, his voice breaking. "I didn't do anything wrong." The officer leaned forward, his eyes cold. "We're not here to play games, Mr. Turner. We have a duty to protect this community, and right now, that means getting to the bottom of why you had that baby." Sam could feel the walls closing in around him. "I called for help. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "People do desperate things," the officer said, shrugging. "Maybe you thought if you called, it would make you look innocent. But it doesn't. It just makes you look guilty and stupid." Tears of frustration welled up in Sam's eyes, but he blinked them back. He couldn't afford to break down now. He thought about his son, Michael, waiting for him at home, probably wondering why his dad wasn't back yet. He thought about his own father, who had taught him to always do the right thing, no matter how hard it was. And now, for trying to do the right thing, he was here, treated like a criminal. The tides turn against him. Hours later, Sam was allowed to make a phone call. His hands trembled as he dialed the number for his best friend, Aaron. When Aaron picked up, Sam's voice cracked. "They've arrested me, Aaron. They think I tried to kidnap a baby." "What?" Aaron's voice was full of shock. "That's insane. You'd never—" "I know," Sam said, his throat tightening, "but they don't believe me. It's all over the news and they're charging me." Aaron was silent for a moment. "Listen, we'll get you a lawyer. We'll figure this out. Don't say anything else to them until you have someone there." But as Sam hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The truth didn't matter anymore. The story was out there, and people had already made up their minds about him. From the interrogation room, Sam could see a TV mounted on the wall outside. The news was showing a clip of him, his hands in cuffs, as the headline read, "Local mailman charged with attempted kidnapping." His face stared back at him, distorted by the angle of the video, making him look dangerous, threatening. Sam slumped back in his chair, his chest aching with a pain he had never felt before. He had always believed that if you did the right thing, things would work out in the end. But now, he wasn't so sure. The story of Sam Turner's arrest spread like wildfire, jumping from local gossip to a full-blown media frenzy within hours. News vans parked outside the police station, their antennas reaching skyward, while reporters waited eagerly for the next update. By the next morning, Sam's face was plastered across every TV screen, accompanied by bold, sensationalist headlines. "Mailman arrested in attempted kidnapping," and "alleged child abductor taken into custody." The narrative had taken on a life of its own. Online, social media feeds were flooded with posts about Sam, most of them uninformed and speculative. People who had never met him shared the story, adding their own assumptions and accusations. Sam's image, a single frame of him being led away in handcuffs, became a symbol, but not of the man he was, rather of the man they wanted him to be. A faceless, menacing figure who posed a threat to the community. As the story gained momentum, so did the lies. Several witnesses emerged, eager to add to the drama. One woman claimed she had seen Sam lurking around the neighborhood a few days before the incident, peeking into yards. Another said they had seen him driving by slowly, as if scouting the area. None of these accounts were true, but they added fuel to the fire, making the media coverage even more damning. Sam watched in horror as these false stories were repeated on television, with news anchors nodding solemnly, feeding into the narrative that he was a dangerous man. He could barely recognize himself in the person they were describing, a predator, a monster. On the third day after his arrest, Sam received a call from his supervisor. The voice on the other end was stiff, formal. "Sam, we're placing you on indefinite suspension. I'm sorry, but we can't have you delivering mail until this situation is resolved." Sam's heart sank. He had spent years building relationships with the people on his route, and now, in an instant, it was all being taken away. The thought of not working, of losing the one thing that gave his days purpose and structure, left him feeling hollow. But it wasn't just his job that was slipping away. As he walked through town to pick up groceries, the change was palpable. People who used to smile and wave at him now averted their eyes or whispered behind his back. He overheard snippets of conversation, fragments of cruel, baseless judgment. "Did you hear about Sam? I always thought there was something off about him. Who knows what he was planning to do with that baby? It's sick." He wanted to scream, to grab them and tell them that they were wrong. But he knew it would make no difference. They had already decided who he was, and no amount of truth would change their minds. Inside the precinct, the police investigation continued, but it was clear that they had no interest in finding the truth. They asked perfunctory questions, skipping over details that might have provided Sam's defense with ammunition. The fact that the door to the house had been unlocked went unmentioned, and there was no effort to investigate why the baby had been left there in the first place. A detective, tired of the case and eager to move on, suggested closing it quickly. "It's what the public wants," he said to his colleague. "We need to show that we can handle situations like this." No one seemed to care that Sam was not the real problem, only that they needed to pin the blame on someone to calm the growing hysteria. Sam sat in the dim light of his small apartment, staring at his phone. He had tried to call a few friends, hoping for support, but most of them either didn't pick up or gave vague, non-committal responses. It was clear they were afraid to be associated with him, fearing that their names would be dragged into the storm of public opinion. One night, his phone buzzed with a new notification, and he saw a video that made his stomach twist. It was a local news clip featuring a man who claimed to have seen Sam wandering around the neighborhood looking suspicious a week ago. Sam had never seen this man in his life, but now his words were being broadcast to thousands of people, adding weight to the lies that had already been spread. Every new witness statement, every speculative news story was like a nail in the coffin of his reputation. Sam had no idea how he was going to fight this, how he could convince anyone that he wasn't the monster they had made him out to be. The few calls he had managed to make to his family were painful. His sister, who lived out of state, sounded worried and unsure. "Sam, you have to stay strong," she said. But he could hear the doubt in her voice, the fear that maybe, just maybe, there was truth to the rumors. He spent long nights unable to sleep, thinking back to the moment he had found the baby, trying to trace how everything had spiraled out of control from there. He had been raised to believe that doing the right thing was important, that helping others was its own reward. But what was the reward for doing the right thing now? Fear, humiliation, and isolation. One evening, Sam saw a new headline that sent chills down his spine. A woman had come forward, claiming that she had seen him peering into the windows of houses in the neighborhood the day before the baby was found. It was a complete fabrication, but it added a layer of darkness to the story that made him look even more guilty. The public, starved for more drama, devoured it. The comments underneath the article were brutal. "Lock him up and throw away the key." "Sick freak." How could anyone even think of defending this guy? The words blurred together as Sam read, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. He put his phone down, but the hateful messages kept coming, buzzing incessantly as people continued to tear him apart online. He had never felt so alone in his life. As he sat in his darkened apartment, his only company was the constant ping of notifications, each one a reminder of how far he had fallen in the eyes of the world. How had a simple act of compassion turned into this nightmare? The day ended with Sam sitting on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the wall. His mind was numb, unable to process the reality of what was happening. He had tried to be a good person, to help a child in need, and now it seemed like the world was punishing him for it. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny flicker of hope still burned. A stubborn belief that the truth would eventually come out. But as each new lie spread, that flicker grew dimmer, and Sam couldn't help but wonder if it would soon be extinguished entirely. Sam Turner's life had always been about doing the right thing. He was a single father, raising his son Michael, with a quiet dignity that had earned him respect from many in his small community. After his wife's sudden death 5 years ago, he had taken on the role of both father and mother, balancing his job as a mailman with the endless responsibilities of parenthood. Every morning, he would wake up early to prepare breakfast for Michael, who was now 9 years old, before heading out on his delivery route. Despite the challenges, Sam always found a way to be there for his son, attending every school event, every soccer game, and making sure they spent their weekends together. For Michael, his dad was his hero, steady, reliable, and always putting others before himself. But now, as Sam sat alone in the cold cell of the police station, he felt further from that image than ever. He thought of Michael, who was staying with a neighbour. What was he telling his son? What could he say? That his father was a good man, even if the whole world thought otherwise? Sam's head dropped, and he buried his face in his hands, a mix of fear and frustration overwhelming him. He had always believed in the system, in doing the right thing, but it felt like that belief was slipping away, and with it, everything he had fought for. Across town, Clara Brooks sat in her small office, scrolling through the news stories about Sam. She was no stranger to cases like this, where a single act of misunderstanding, amplified by prejudice, could ruin someone's life. Clara was a lawyer with a passion for justice, known for taking on cases that others wouldn't touch. Her sharp mind and unrelenting drive had earned her both allies and enemies, but she had never backed down from a fight. When she saw the video of Sam's arrest, something stirred inside her. She could see the fear in his eyes, the confusion, and she knew, even without the full story, that this wasn't a simple case. Clara had spent years fighting against racial profiling and injustices in the system, and this had all the signs of another miscarriage of justice. She decided she needed to meet him. The next day, she walked into the police station, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. She demanded to see Sam Turner, and after a few minutes of bureaucratic shuffling, she was escorted to a small room where Sam was brought in, his wrists still cuffed. Clara sat across from him, observing the tired lines on his face and the way his shoulders slumped. "Mr. Turner, my name is Clara Brooks. I'm a lawyer, and I'd like to help you." Sam's eyes flickered with a mixture of hope and wariness. "I don't see how anyone can help me," he said quietly. "They've already decided I'm guilty. The whole town thinks I'm a kidnapper." Clara leaned forward, her gaze steady. "That's not how justice works. Not if I have anything to say about it. I've seen cases like this before, and I can tell you right now that there are flaws in how this has been handled. But I need your permission to act on your behalf." Sam hesitated, a thousand doubts swirling in his mind. He had been through enough to know that promises didn't always mean results. "What's the point?" he said finally. "People have already made up their minds." "Maybe some have," Clara admitted, "but the truth still matters. And if you didn't do anything wrong, then we need to prove that. For you, for your son, and for everyone who's watching this unfold. Because if we don't fight back, they'll just keep doing this to people like you." There was a long silence, and then Sam nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I'll trust you." Meanwhile, in his office, Marcus Green sat behind his desk, tapping his fingers impatiently. The case had become a headache, a problem that needed solving, quickly. Ever since the incident, there had been a growing unease in the community, and people were looking to him to restore order. He was a man who thrived on control, on ensuring that things ran smoothly under his watch. Marcus knew that the best way to calm things down was to show that the police were on top of the situation. That meant finding a culprit, and fast. He had seen the way the media had latched onto the story, and it was clear to him that Sam Turner would serve as the perfect scapegoat. There was no time to investigate further, no time to dig into the complexities of why the baby had been on that porch. "If we can close this case quickly, it will show that we're effective," he said to one of his officers. "The town wants results, not excuses." "But sir, there are inconsistencies. We haven't looked into the family, and there are other things we should be considering," the officer replied, hesitantly. Marcus shot him a sharp look. "We're not here to ask questions that don't need to be answered. Turner is our suspect, and that's all the public needs to know." After her meeting with Sam, Clara dove headfirst into the case. She started by gathering all the details she could, from police reports to the viral videos that had painted Sam in such a negative light. It was clear to her that there were gaps in the investigation, things that didn't add up. Why hadn't anyone questioned the child's family? Why wasn't there more focus on where the baby came from? Clara spent long nights in her office, poring over every piece of information she could find. She contacted the police, demanding to see the official reports, but was met with resistance at every turn. It was clear that someone was trying to make this case disappear as quickly as possible. 2 days later, Clara stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed, and the murmur of the crowd grew louder as she approached the microphone. "I'm here to announce that I will be representing Sam Turner," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The accusations against him are serious, but so are the questions that remain unanswered. We intend to seek the truth, no matter how inconvenient it may be for those who wish to brush this matter aside. Mr. Turner deserves a fair investigation, and we will not stop until he gets one. Her words were met with a mix of skepticism and support, but it was a start. Sam, sitting in his cell, watched the broadcast on the small TV mounted in the corner. For the first time in days, he felt something other than despair. Clara's resolve gave him a sliver of hope, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, the truth could still come to light. But as the camera panned away, showing Marcus Green watching from the shadows, it was clear that the battle had only just begun. Clara's days were filled with relentless searching, reviewing reports, and talking to anyone who might have seen something the day Sam found the baby. She knew there had to be more to the story. No one just abandons a child without a reason. And yet, the police investigation had failed to ask the right questions. But Clara wasn't deterred. If they wouldn't dig deeper, she would. After days of combing through the neighborhood, Clara finally got a break. A local resident, an elderly man named Mr. Harris, mentioned that his security camera had recorded something unusual on the day of the incident. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She asked to see the footage, and Mr. Harris agreed. The footage was grainy, but it was clear enough. The video showed a woman in a hoodie walking briskly up to the porch of the house where Sam had found the baby. She placed the infant down, adjusted the blanket, and glanced around nervously before hurrying back down the street, disappearing out of view. Clara's eyes widened as she watched. This was the proof they needed. Evidence that someone else had left the baby there and that Sam had stumbled upon the child later. She quickly made a copy of the video and headed straight to the police station, adrenaline pumping through her veins. At the precinct, she demanded to speak with the officers handling Sam's case. "I have new evidence," she said, her tone sharp. "You need to see this." She showed them the video and, for a moment, there was silence. The officers exchanged uncertain glances before one of them spoke. "This changes things," he admitted. "We'll need to review this, but if it checks out, we might be looking at a different situation." For the first time since his arrest, Sam felt a sense of relief. Clara visited him later that day, bringing the news. "We have footage," she said, smiling. "It shows someone else leaving the baby on the porch. They're reviewing it now, but this could be what clears your name." Sam's eyes filled with tears, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't think anyone would ever believe me." "There's still a lot of work to do," Clara said, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. "But this is a big step. We're going to get you out of this, Sam." For the next 24 hours, it felt like everything might finally turn around. Clara could almost see the light at the end of the tunnel, and Sam, too, dared to hope that his nightmare would soon be over. But as they were about to learn, things were not so simple. The following day, Clara received a call from the police department. She expected good news, a confirmation that they were preparing to release Sam. Instead, her stomach dropped as she listened to the officer on the other end. "I'm sorry, Miss Brooks, but there's no record of the footage you submitted. We can't locate it in the evidence system." "What do you mean you can't locate it?" Clara snapped, her voice rising. "I handed it to you myself. You saw it." "I understand, ma'am," the officer said, his tone maddeningly calm. "But there's nothing here. Without the footage, we can't reopen the investigation." Clara was speechless. She had been in this game long enough to know when something was being buried. Someone, somewhere, had made that footage disappear. She stormed into the precinct, demanding answers, but she was met with blank stares and shrugged shoulders. It was as if the video had never existed. Clara's next move was direct and bold. She barged into Chief Marcus Green's office, slamming her hands on his desk. "I know what you're doing," she said, her eyes flashing with anger. "You think you can just make evidence disappear and sweep this under the rug, but I won't let that happen." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I don't know what you're talking about, Miss Brooks. If the evidence is missing, maybe it was never there in the first place." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "You're trying to frame an innocent man to close your case quickly, and it's going to come back to bite you." "You're making a lot of accusations without proof," Marcus said, his voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. "I'd be careful if I were you." News of the missing footage quickly spread, But instead of sympathy, it only led to more vilification of Sam. People speculated that the evidence had never existed, that it was just a ploy by his desperate lawyer to muddy the waters. Sam, who had briefly felt hope for the first time in weeks, was crushed. As he sat in his cell, he could feel the despair creeping back, suffocating him. The system was against him, the town was against him, and even with the truth on his side, it felt like he was losing. He thought about Michael and wondered how he would explain this to his son if he was never able to clear his name. But Clara wasn't one to back down. She started asking questions, digging deeper, and looking for anyone who might be able to shed light on what was happening inside the police department. Eventually, she managed to get a lead. An anonymous tip that hinted at internal corruption. The tipster claimed that someone within the department had deliberately made the footage disappear, acting under orders from higher up. Clara arranged to meet the informant late at night in a quiet corner of a parking lot. It was risky, but if she could get the information she needed, she could force the case back into the spotlight and expose the truth. She stood there, her heart pounding, waiting for the contact to arrive. As she glanced around, she spotted a figure approaching, hidden under a hood. "You're the one who called me?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Yes," the person replied, their voice low and cautious. "I don't have much time, but you need to know that they're trying to bury this. The chief doesn't want this case to drag on, so they're making sure it disappears. But there's more to it. It's not just about clearing Sam, it's about hiding what really happened to that baby." Clara's breath caught as she processed the information. There was something deeper at play, and she was starting to see just how many layers of deceit there were. "Tell me everything," she said, her eyes narrowing. The small square outside the courthouse was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, their faces lit by the harsh glare of camera lights. Clara stood at the podium, her expression steely and determined. Beside her, Sam stood tall, despite the weight of everything he had endured. Today was about reclaiming his dignity, and he wasn't going to hide anymore. "Thank you all for coming," Clara began, her voice firm but calm. "We're here today because an innocent man's life has been torn apart by a rush to judgment, by a system that refused to look for the truth. But that ends now." Clara took a deep breath and began to walk the crowd through the events step by step. She detailed how Sam had found the baby, how he had immediately called for help, and how the police had ignored crucial evidence in their eagerness to close the case. She didn't shy away from highlighting the racial undertones that had influenced the public's perception of Sam, nor did she hold back on calling out the flaws in Marcus Green's leadership. From the very beginning, there were questions that were never asked, evidence that was ignored, and a story that was spun without regard for the facts, Clara said, her eyes sweeping across the audience. "We have spoken to witnesses who confirmed that Sam Turner did nothing wrong. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he became an easy target." The air was tense as Clara introduced Mrs. Jenkins, a slight, elderly woman with sharp eyes that betrayed her years of watching the world with keen attention. "This is Mrs. Jenkins," Clara announced. "She has something important to share." Mrs. Jenkins took a shaky step forward, gripping the microphone tightly. "I don't like speaking in front of so many people," she said, her voice wavering, "but I need to say this. I was there that day. I live across the street, and I saw a woman, not Sam Turner, leaving the baby on that porch. She looked scared, like she was in a hurry, and then she ran off. A little while later, I saw Sam come up and find the baby." There was a murmur through the crowd, and the camera zoomed in on Mrs. Jenkins as she continued. "I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and I know Sam. He's a good man. He didn't do anything wrong." Back in his office, Marcus watched the live broadcast, his jaw clenched. This was turning into a disaster. He had hoped that Clara's efforts would amount to nothing, but she had managed to find a witness, a credible one at that. He quickly devised a plan, reaching out to a few allies in the media to release a story that questioned Clara's motives, suggesting that she was using Sam's case to gain fame and notoriety. Minutes later, Marcus appeared at the press conference, pushing his way through the crowd to stand beside the podium. "I'd like to make a statement," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur. While I appreciate Miss Brooks's passion, it's important to remember that this case is still under investigation. Sam Turner is not yet exonerated, and we cannot allow unfounded claims to undermine the integrity of our police department. Clara's jaw tightened as Marcus spoke, trying to twist the narrative back in his favour. "You're right, Chief Green," she said, stepping forward. "The integrity of your department is at stake, but not because of anything I've said. It's at stake because you have ignored crucial evidence and have refused to search for the truth." The confrontation between Clara and Marcus played out in front of the cameras, a tense standoff that seemed to capture the attention of everyone watching. Clara turned to the reporters, her voice unwavering. "The police claim they lost the surveillance footage I submitted. They said it doesn't exist. But I'm here to tell you that's not true." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "I have the original video recovered from another source, and I'm going to show it to you now." There was a gasp from the crowd as a projector was set up, and the footage began to play on a large screen. The image was unmistakable. A woman, her hood pulled up, carefully placing the baby on the porch before glancing around and hurrying away. The timestamp confirmed it was taken just minutes before Sam arrived. As the video played, Clara's voice cut through the silence. "This is the evidence that was conveniently lost by the police. This is the truth that they have been trying to hide. Sam Turner did nothing wrong. And Chief Green, I think it's time you answer why this evidence was not part of your investigation." The atmosphere was electric as the video ended, the crowd buzzing with shock and disbelief. Marcus stood there, trying to maintain his composure, but the cracks were beginning to show. "This is irregular," he stammered. "We need time to verify." "Time to cover your tracks, you mean?" Clara interjected sharply. "The time for hiding is over. I demand that this case be reopened immediately and that an inquiry be launched into the mishandling of this investigation." The reporters pressed in, shouting questions at Marcus, who struggled to come up with a coherent response. It was clear that he had lost control of the situation, and for the first time, Sam felt a glimmer of hope that things might finally change. By the end of the press conference, the police had no choice but to announce that Sam was no longer a suspect. The pressure from the public, combined with Clara's bold actions, forced their hand. Marcus, his face ashen, reluctantly promised a full investigation into the new evidence and the possibility of reopening the case. But as Clara and Sam left the courthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. She had exposed Marcus's attempts to suppress the truth, but she was beginning to suspect that this was just the surface of a much deeper issue within the police department. She knew they had won a battle, but the war was far from over. As Sam stood beside Clara, watching the reporters scramble to write their stories, he felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. "Do you really think this is over?" he asked quietly. "No," Clara said, looking out at the city. "But it's a start, and we're going to see this through, no matter what it takes." The press conference had done more than just clear Sam's name. It had set off a chain reaction that forced the police department to take a hard look at itself. With public scrutiny now focused on them, they had no choice but to reopen the investigation and start asking the questions they had neglected before. For Clara, it was a victory, but she knew it was just the beginning. Clara didn't waste any time. She pushed for a full investigation into the case, and this time, the police had to do it properly. They began by retracing the events of that day, starting with the surveillance footage that Clara had presented. The image of the woman who had left the baby was now central to their investigation, and it didn't take long for them to identify her. The woman was a nanny, Elizabeth Miller, who had been hired by the baby's parents. When Clara heard the name, she immediately reached out to Elizabeth, hoping to understand why she had taken such a drastic step. The truth was more heart-wrenching than she had imagined. Elizabeth sat across from Clara in a small, quiet cafe, her hands trembling as she recounted her story. "I was hired to take care of the baby, but things weren't right in that house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The parents, they were fighting all the time, and sometimes it got physical. I was scared for the baby. I didn't know what to do." Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued. One night, things got really bad. I heard shouting, glass breaking, and I just knew I had to get the baby out of there. I didn't know where to go, so I thought if I left him somewhere safe, someone would find him and he'd be okay. Clara listened, her heart heavy with empathy. Elizabeth's story was one of desperation, a last-ditch effort to protect a child from harm when she felt she had no other options. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Clara asked gently. Elizabeth shook her head. "I was scared. The parents, they have connections. They told me if I ever tried to speak out, they'd make sure I paid for it. I thought leaving him there was the only way." As the investigation continued, more disturbing details began to emerge. Clara had been right. There was more to the case than just Sam's wrongful arrest. Internal records revealed that Marcus Green had ordered the original surveillance footage to be suppressed, instructing his officers to claim it was lost to avoid complicating the case. He had been desperate to close the matter quickly, not wanting a messy investigation to tarnish the department's reputation. When this information was leaked to the press, it caused an uproar. The community that had once trusted Marcus to keep them safe now saw him for what he was, a man willing to sacrifice justice for the sake of expediency. Under immense pressure, Marcus was forced to resign, his career and reputation in ruins. Clara watched as Marcus gave his resignation speech, his eyes downcast, his words hollow. He apologized for the errors that had been made but refused to take full responsibility. Clara knew that while Marcus had been removed, the problem was bigger than just one man. There was a culture within the department that needed to change, and she was determined to make it happen. With the truth finally out, Sam was officially cleared of all charges. The city issued a formal apology, acknowledging the injustice he had suffered. But as Sam stood in front of the cameras, listening to the carefully worded statement, he couldn't help but feel that the damage had already been done. His life had been torn apart, and no amount of apologies could change that. But something unexpected began to happen. Slowly, members of the community started to reach out to him, expressing their regret for how quickly they had judged him. His mailbox, once filled with hate mail, was now receiving letters of support and apologies. People who had turned their backs on him now stood by his side, and it was as if the town was trying to make amends for their collective mistake. One evening, Clara suggested that Sam speak at a community event to share his experience and use his story to advocate for change. "You have a voice, Sam," she said softly. "People are listening now. You can use this to make sure no one else goes through what you did." Sam hesitated at first, but he knew she was right. He couldn't just walk away from this without trying to make a difference. And so, on a warm evening, he stood in front of a crowd gathered in the town square, his heart pounding as he looked out at the sea of faces. "I'm not here to dwell on what happened to me," he began, his voice steady. "I'm here to talk about why it happened and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. We need to be better. We need to see each other as human beings, not just headlines." Inspired by her work on Sam's case, Clara decided to take her fight further. She launched an initiative aimed at reforming local law enforcement, advocating for transparency, accountability, and better training to prevent bias. She worked tirelessly, organising community meetings, speaking to lawmakers, and building alliances with other activists and legal experts. But Clara didn't stop there. She established a legal support network, offering pro bono services to people who had been wrongfully accused or who had been victims of systemic failures. She named it Turner's Hope, in honour of Sam and the resilience he had shown throughout his ordeal. The final weeks of the case saw the police department undergoing a major overhaul, with new policies implemented to ensure that evidence handling and investigative processes were transparent and unbiased. Marcus's resignation was just the beginning. Several other officers were investigated and reprimanded for their role in suppressing evidence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the town, Sam found himself walking his old mail route for the first time in months. He had been invited to return to his job, and while part of him was hesitant, he knew he couldn't let the past dictate his future. When he reached the house where he had found the baby, he stopped for a moment, looking at the porch that had changed his life. Now it was decorated with flowers, and a young family was sitting outside, laughing and playing with the baby who had once been abandoned. They waved to Sam and he smiled back, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. Across town, Clara was busy preparing for another community meeting, but she took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. It hadn't been easy, and the scars would remain, but she felt hopeful. Change was happening, and it was because people had come together to demand it. The story of Sam Turner became a symbol of resilience, of what could happen when people refused to give up on the truth. Clara's work continued, and she became a well-known advocate for justice, using her platform to push for broader reforms that extended beyond their small town. "You did it, Clara," Sam said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You changed everything." "No, Sam," Clara replied, smiling. "We did it, together." Sam's story shows us that even in the darkest moments, courage and truth can shine through. What began as a simple act of kindness became a powerful battle against prejudice, injustice, and corruption. Thanks to Sam's resilience and Clara's determination, the truth prevailed, sparking hope and change for an entire community. If this story moved you, make sure to give it a thumbs up, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.